She's had a really, really rocket-fueled career with a lot of different twists and turns, but ultimately she found her spot in sales. And you might recognize that my maiden name matches hers, and that's because she also happens to be my sister. I affectionately refer to Luisa since the beginning, since she was born 6 years after I lost my spot as an only child, as my favorite person. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is very much how she conducts herself in business, the obstacles that she's overcome, the way that she has been able to gracefully enter motherhood and still keep that force of nature as it relates to her workplace, and then still has time to answer the phone when her sister needs her. So I think today is going to be a really special discussion. I'm so excited that she's here. Luisa, we're going to go ahead and get started with you just giving a little bit of a background, what you studied in school, how you ended up where you are, and then we'll get into a fireside chat with some of the questions that were asked in advance of this meeting. So go ahead.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the introduction. This is definitely a first for the Carneiro sisters doing something professional together. So super exciting. Yeah, as Paula mentioned, I'm currently in sales, but like a lot of the awesome women that I've heard speak during this panel all week, it was not a straight trajectory. And knowing that there's a lot of young professionals on this call, I think that's okay. And that's traditional and almost the new normal, unlike a generation ago where, you know, what you were aspiring to do was stay with a company for 20 plus years. And, you know, hopefully through telling my story, I can share how that can actually be a superpower. I think Paula embodies it, you know, quite well. She's had more twists and turns and experiences than I have. So to kind of go back, I think I have to start the story with talking about our mother. Because Paula and I were raised in a single, you know, mother household. And not only was she a working mother, she was an executive. So I saw the whole put on a suit, go to the office, briefcase days, you know, and that was my role model. That was our mom. And anything that I pulled out from that, you know, and what I was going to aspire to be was, you know, I always wanted to become a mother. But more importantly, there was this theme of needing to be self-sufficient. And so going, you know, through college and through school, I knew that a big part of what I was going to do in choosing a career path was make sure that I can make enough money essentially to take care of myself and potentially a family, because you just never know what life is going to throw at you. And I know that's not the experience of everyone, but that was definitely how I walked through my college years and my early professional years, was not with this idea that a partner was going to help contribute to a combined income. Like, it was always just about self-sufficiency. And when I got to college, you know, I entered into a psych major. I don't think there's any crazy story about why I landed into psychology. I think I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do. And it was this cool, new at the time, you know, major that my guidance counselor probably at the time told me could feed into a lot of different career paths, which is true because it really is the study of people. And you know, but me being this sort of like purist at the time of thinking that, no, what I go to school for, I need to then go to more school for it. And I need to find a career in that path. I kind of lined up this idea of, you know, becoming a therapist or maybe going into research psychology. And so that was kind of in my head in early days. You know, I do want to kind of mention also that this idea of graduate school at the time in my generation was also huge and also almost a must-have. It was communicated to us, you know, to the millennials that, you know, in order to have a leg up, you need a graduate degree. And going back to my mentors and people that I looked up to, you know, my mom had a master's degree. My dad had gone back to school to complete his degree. My uncle had a PhD. So that was also something, you know, that I felt like I had to do. So enter psych, keep on that pure path in my young 20-something mind, apply to graduate school. I get into a master's program and decide, I'm going to go to night school and get my master's degree in counseling while getting my first job. And my first job couldn't have been anything more opposite than what I am doing today. In many ways, it's somewhat similar, and I'll thread that needle through. But I got my first job as a placement specialist at Goodwill, working with a caseload of about 50 individuals, helping place them in jobs. They had barriers to work. So for any of you who don't know, Goodwill is more than just a thrift store. It is a nonprofit where all of that money goes towards the programs to help people who have barriers to work find work. And my little 22-year-old self, however old I was at the time, found myself working on Obama's fatherhood grant, which primarily helped men who had barriers to work find work. And those barriers, the most common ones, were incarceration. So insert me, first job, meeting daily, weekly with men who had just gotten out of, I'm not kidding you, like 15, 20-year stints in prison, and like hadn't used the internet and hadn't used a cell phone and all of these things. And I'm going to night school, and it was, it was intense. Like, it was not this fairy tale perception I had of forging, my way into becoming this career woman. But it brought me so many valuable lessons, and it started really shaping like the things that I enjoyed, the things that I didn't enjoy. That was probably the first true eye-opener into what it felt like to be a woman in the workplace, because I had the most stark yin and yang, interaction possible at an early stage. And I don't fault these guys for probably not respecting me and being like, how is this 20-something-year-old girl going to help me achieve what I need to achieve with all of the life experiences of these men that I was dealing with? But, I continued doing it for 2.5 years, trying to sort of understand what my next stage would be. Going to school, was this really for me? Was I really doing what my calling was? And that's where I kind of pivoted, because I realized that the people around me who were in social work really had a calling. And, while I valued the work I was doing, and I had, I have an immense amount of gratitude still for that experience, even though I wasn't anticipating all that it would bring me, and was just kind of looking for a job, and found this whole experience, I realized like time to lean into my strengths and learn my weaknesses. And a weakness I had in that was it was too heavy for me. I would walk around with kind of a different lens through life and couldn't help but feel very heavy in my heart. And the women and men that I worked with at Goodwill were just, complete angels. Like this was their career. This was their calling. And I think it's important to like trust your gut, because I think I had it was hard for me to pull away from this like straight and narrow path that I thought I had to follow, especially having spent hours going to a graduate program and night school. Like, was I just going to drop out of school? Like, that's not something that I, identify with, and sort of quitting. And am I just like, for 5.5, 6+ years, have really envisioned myself getting this degree and going down this path of counseling? Am I just going to quit that? But some of the best, forks in the road that I've come across have really led to the next best thing. And so I had to really listen to that inner voice and shift. And I had always been told I should check out sales. And if you don't know me, it's, I don't know, probably a personality thing. Maybe I'm somewhat influential, or, can convince people of things. Who knows? But it kept, the people around me kept chirping in my ear. And so at the time did a LinkedIn Google search. I didn't have a network at the time. I didn't have a network of salespeople. Like, I didn't know tech sales companies. Like, I was in social work. Are you kidding me? No one I had, surrounded myself with was going into this field. And applied to some jobs and ended up in the true boiler room, smile and dial, 250 phone calls a day environment. And it could not, I mean, there was beer pong and the whole like talk about trying to attract, the new generation of salespeople, the whole thing. And I loved the sale. I really found something that I loved and I was good at it. Like, I was surpassing people that had been there longer than me. And I found this niche. I stayed there, got a couple of promotions, but what I realized is that once you kind of find a skill set, there's sort of two paths, and this is in several careers. There's the continuing to be that individual contributor, whether you're in marketing, whether you're an engineer, right? Like, there's the continuing to work on the project that you're working on for yourself and your clients, and then there's the managerial route. And something about my time, I think, is being in social work and like working with people and managing people, like, and even having really good managers myself and seeing their impact on me along the way. Like, I kept really feeling like eventually I would want management. And I don't recommend management for everyone or anyone who's good at their job. It's not that next step that everyone should take. But I had done some personality assessments at that point and talked to some managers, and it really felt like, I could continue climbing this ladder of being an enterprise individual contributor. And there's a lot of money to be made there and a lot of accolades to be made there. But I kind of was getting this calling to go another route. And when I was in sales and looking for another pivot, and I had developed a little bit of a network, it really became about like, what do I want to sell? What will excite me enough in my day-to-day to keep me going until I can make these career moves? But then also, where can I really be authentically myself? What's an environment where I truly feel like I can be the talkative, quirky, loud, big personality without feeling like that's gonna get stifled or gonna get looked at in a different way. And I'm sure there's, a lot of women and even professionals out there in more corporate environments that kind of understand what I'm talking about. And I knew there was this sweet spot. I didn't want a super duper startup. I liked a little bit of, process already in place, but I didn't want that big corporate structure that I had at that point after having been in sales, 2-3 years at that point. A lot of people that worked at the Oracles and the big companies in the world. And I didn't want that either. So I think really when I had the liberty and flexibility to think about what I wanted my next move to be, that was really important. Where can I be myself? What environment will harness that well? And what would be interesting for me to sell? And I actually pivoted from selling like a software to people. Now I'm in service sales. And I manage a team, and I was able to make that jump, and it's been extremely fulfilling. Now I've been managing people for about 6 years, and it's always a challenge. And, I think it's a calling. It's interesting. I look at, a big sort of circle of where I was, where, I talk to people who, I share stories with at my workplace, and they're like, I could never do what you do. Like, that just sounds so stressful, or this, that, and the other. And it's a really cool aha moment to be like, I feel like this is exactly, what I want to do. And by no means am I where I want to be at in terms of being this incredible manager. I'm still learning every day, and, reading a really awesome book right now called The Leader Lab, that I recommend. And, but it is still something that I wake up and I'm excited about every day, because I have an impact on people's lives and helping them become better versions of themselves. And the quote that I heard about in the book that I thought really resonated was the term manager came from the word to handle. Like that is what it used to be, to handle people. And great managers now really no longer manage people. They're managing resources, they're managing processes, time, priorities, and really they're catalyzing the results rather than just controlling behavior. And that's what this book is all about. And I just think that's so cool. And it kind of is a circle back to my psych degree and, all the empathy I think that I learned in social work and how to just show up for people in the day to day is a part of any manager's job, no matter what career path you take. And so, while different twists and turns will happen in any career, I think all those twists and turns are really, you're going to get valuable little nuggets that help you kind of identify what you're good at, what your strengths and weaknesses are, what you'd enjoyed about something, what you didn't. And I think it's all about leaning into balancing that out and finding, the end goal and continuing to grow in that space. And I mean, I feel fortunate that it only took me 3 years to find my career path, because I think it takes several people 10 plus, which is okay. But if you just have a good balance of trusting your gut, but then kind of also extracting your learnings from the previous experience and trying to weigh logic and intuition, I think everyone kind of finds it in the end. So that's my story.
That's awesome, Luisa. Thank you so much. And hearing some of the different ways that you've gone about it, it's like, again, yes, this is probably our first professional setting of understanding this. So I want to dig into some of the things that you said, because I think they're really super powerful. One of the things you mentioned, which we talked about this week too, was the fact that millennials, right? So this is a traditional millennial path to have kind of this beer pong environment, attracting talent, having different kinds of people. And we know that even millennials, like you and I, are both technically millennials, 6 years apart. There's a huge technological gap between what school looked like for me and what school looked like for you, for example. So in your position of leadership now, how is it that you guys fuse or meld those different generations? And, as they kind of come to the workplace, what does that look like collaborating, having, boomers, millennials, Gen Zs, all kind of working under the same roof together now that you're in a position of leadership?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it definitely happens and is prevalent, especially I would say, like, even recently, my boss was chuckling because I had just, having had a baby, couldn't make it to this conference, and he had dinner with my team, who is all younger than him, and I would say of a different generation. And he joked and he was like, man, they made me feel old, but I loved it. I loved like sitting back and listening to the things that they were talking about that I didn't understand, and those nuances. And I think it's all about embracing it. I think, in my company, it's very diverse in terms of, the different ages and places and regions. I mean, we're a global company, so we literally have people sitting in the seat of California all the way to APAC. But I think it's all about understanding and learning and embracing, and I'm so proud to say that at my company, we have panels to talk about. I mean, we had a women's week as well at my workplace, and, we have different cultural panels to share, different things about different regions, or, we had a postpartum panel to share stories. And I think it's all about being inquisitive and kind of understanding that gap of where someone may be versus where you're at, if it comes to a technology like Salesforce, or how to use a tool that people are using to present now that someone else may have never heard of or may have not seen, or the fact that a young BDR may want to create a TikTok to prospect. And that may sound weird to my boss's boss, but if he embraces it and is for it and for the change, that's what can be really powerful, because I think each generation does have things we should still be learning from one another.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's so smart. And we were even talking about the different recruiting tactics too. Like I printed out, my resume and then sent it in with a typed up cover letter. And now we have, this dynamic resume that's LinkedIn and or referrals, sending voice notes. So just even the way that you get jobs today is so very different. One of the other things that I think, as a leader, when you're looking to hire, I know that in this recent position, you were tasked with building out a team, looking through resumes. So, and with your personal experience, and I remember that too, of the graduate degree is so important. It's the differentiator, and in this, now fast forward, it's not as much of a commonplace thing. So what would you advise to somebody who's on the fence about, a graduate degree, but wants to go for a job that maybe has that as a requirement? How do you go about overcoming that or, looking past it or even going for it?
Yeah.
What would you recommend
I
there?
mean, I would say, is it that particular job and company that is requiring that graduate degree, or is this something that you're going after? Are you consistently seeing that it is a requirement? I mean, I won't take away from the fact that I do feel that there still are several professions out there where it is not just a nice to have, but potentially a requirement. And I still kind of waffle between this idea that I might need to get an MBA. And what's interesting, we're on the topic of women. It's not necessarily, I think, that I need the content of what an MBA is going to teach me to be successful at my job, but it is kind of this like to make the next jump or level up or get where I want to get to in 10 years, especially as a woman in the workplace where there's a lot of men in that C-suite. Do I need that for just optics? And that's still something that I weigh and I think of, which seems silly, but it's the world we live in. It's a reality. But to that person that's kind of weighing that, I really, I myself have always said, I don't know if I need to do this now. I'm going to do it if I really get to the point where I feel like it's a necessity. It's okay to wait. It's okay to kind of assess your options. So yeah, I would say do your due diligence, see if it's just that single company or if it's something that's across the board. And if so, and if that's a position or a career or a path that you really feel drawn to, it might be that jump that you need to take.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. And I think it's a personal decision too. Perhaps you can either eliminate the option of something like that, go for it, learn a lesson in what it's like to overcome, a requirement objection potentially, and or see if it's something for you. So we've had a lot of questions pop up along the course of this conversation. So I'm going to synthesize a few of them here for the discussion. So somebody asked here, not following the natural route in academics or workplace often comes with defying expectations and causing disappointment. What is your advice on handling that?
Yeah. I mean, there's in my perspective, there's two types of disappointment. There's disappointment in self and then disappointment and potentially even perceived disappointment from others. Others typically being our parents, like, let's face it. I think that was something I had to juggle with, kind of talking about quitting, like especially quitting school and this job. I think what helped me personally was always having the confidence that I was going to achieve great things. And I think even my husband would tell me that I was always so positive, whether it came to be, in personal and professional things. I just truly believed that, yeah, even if it was going to be rocky and I was going to start from the ground up or whatever, I felt like eventually always I was just going to get to a place I wanted to get to because there was no other option. And I feel fortunate that I kind of have that drive in me. And from a young age, it was always, like I said, kind of seeing my mom, it was just like, nope, that's going to happen for me. Like, no matter what, like whatever I have to do, I'm going to get there. And so you have to expect that along that path, there's going to be disappointment in self if it's not going to be a straight and narrow. So I don't know, I'd say give yourself a little confidence. And if you truly have this inner drive and inner desire to become something, you'll get there because it's drive that takes you there. It's really nothing else but your own inner will.
It's so good. And it's one of the things I admire most about you. Your self-discipline and complete plow through things mentality, I think is just so powerful. And hell, that's how you do great in sales too. It's like, I'm not taking no for an answer. Watch me win this deal. So that's fantastic. So somebody piggybacked off of our earlier question with the generations, which I think this is really interesting, actually. I like this question. So how do you address the differences in communication between generations? For example, some of us grew up with emojis, acronyms, shorthand, LOL, and created their own language versus, more formal, punctuated, Dear Sally, kind regards via email. So how do you recommend kind of balancing or maybe translating, becoming the Rosetta Stone within your organization to bridge those communication gaps?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very salesy answer, but you're taught in sales to really mirror your audience. And so I would say, sometimes it's not necessary to bridge, but meet the person that you're speaking to where they're at. Like, I'm not going to use emojis and LOLs probably with the CEO of my company when I'm slacking him, but like, you better believe I'm sending funny memes to my, my team when I'm chatting with them. So I think it's about kind of getting comfortable being in and out of that space. And I look like I can do that because of the generation I'm in, but also it's about being comfortable being authentically you too. Like, that's what I said. Like, power to the people that say, I feel old in this setting and like I don't get what that acronym means. Like, own it, and I think that we're faced in a time, and especially, I mean, look, I do work for a marketing organization, so I feel like we do trend a little bit younger. So I probably don't have as much experience, Paula, as you, like having to do that flip of a switch when you're in front of a bunch of CFOs, like actually wearing suits. But I do think there's a balance about really trying to stay true to yourself and your generation and your lingo, but also like there's a place where you need to mirror a little bit of who you're communicating with.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I hadn't heard that in a long time, but it's a super Sandler of you to say that, mirroring what you're at. So another question here. So what do you think of work diversity from the perspective of gender and age? Ageism affects women more than men. What do you think your generation can do to bring out skills of Wonder Women out there and utilize their institutional memory, their skills and experience?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I agree, and I think it's going to be interesting growing as a woman in the workplace. I think I just heard a stat on our panel, something crazy about whether or not you wear makeup to work as a woman impacts how much you're paid by like 15% or something crazy. And so I'm not there yet where ageism is affecting me. I would even venture to say that some of even the older women in my company are probably not at that stage yet, But I think going back to the bridging the generational gaps, I think what my generation can do to help combat ageism is that openness of what can we learn from each other. There are things that I may learn from a 20-something-year-old just out of college because, believe it or not, like it's crazy. I am at an age when I feel like I'm old compared to these college kids that are prospecting in a completely different way. And there's new means of communication. And it would be hypocritical for me to not say that there are still incredible things that I can learn from an older generation that have moved through business in a different time. I mean, I talked to mom the other day about like a leadership sort of, situation I was in and still get incredible advice from her, even though she's been out of the corporate world. Not only was she in the corporate world in a different time and place, but also in later years of her life. So I think if we're all open to that notion and don't sit too high on our horse of like, where we're at, especially if we're in tech or in marketing or whatever, and feel like it's this, young person's place to be. Like, it's never good to feel like you have all the answers.
Yeah, no, I think you always have to remain teachable. And then, like you said earlier, learning from the generation before. And ageism goes two ways. A lot of times, I started my career very young, and a lot of the older women that worked with me at stoic corporate multinational organizations would look at me like, what the heck does she have to offer? And how could she possibly be here? Right. And I had some of the most innovative ideas at the time, that didn't get heard unless I went up to the right ranks or the right places and had to kind of wiggle my way into getting the right attention. So I think we can help by kind of being an arm reaching down to the younger generation, but also reaching up to the older generation. The other thing too is that LinkedIn has done a great job of giving skill set training. So a lot of these things that defy or create what we call ageism too is just upskilling necessity, right? And there's a lot of open source forums, a lot of different learnings that women of all ages can look to try and improve themselves. Because at the end of the day, you still have to remain relevant, right? So experience and institutional knowledge is only as good as the relevancy that it plays in today's world. So it's important for us to remember to always stay relevant with what's modern and what's upcoming. So, Luisa, one of the themes that I've imparted on my team, which you'll probably think is actually quite wild, but whenever we meet, one of the things that I always ask them is, what healthy thing did you do for yourself? It's kind of like my icebreaker at the beginning of when my marketing team and my biz dev team come together for a demand gen. And I always ask, did you work out? Did you eat? Did you, try a new recipe? What did you do to be healthy? Because as taking care of your mental and physical health is just such a crucial component of showing up as your best self at work. So that's something I've always admired in you. You've always been so disciplined about taking care of yourself, nourishing your body, making sure that you work out. So tell us a little bit about the, how you go about doing that, how you fit it in, what you tell yourself, and kind of, some tactical approaches to making sure that we're always prioritizing health.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's what you said. It has to be a priority. It's so easy for us to, fill our days and make excuses and, say, well, but I'm tired. Like the most common one, especially now being a mom, is like, do I prioritize taking like a nap and getting some rest over going to the gym? But I think it's always just pushing myself to make it a priority and knowing that I'm going to be my best self with prioritizing that. Everyone knows this. Like, once you get your butt to the gym and you have that workout, no one regrets it. Like, who leaves the gym and says, man, you know what? I really wish I would have taken that nap instead. You're re-energized. It sets you up for success. But it's not easy. I mean, I am in nowhere as disciplined as my husband. He is like a robot when it comes to just always prioritizing 5-6 days a week. And it truly is his therapy. Like, I notice the difference in him when he is not, being healthy and going to the gym. So I do think there are levels. I don't think that everyone should aspire to be this, like, I'm in the gym 5 days a week, eating healthy type of person. For me, I know that, and I have found that my sweet spot is minimum 3 days. If I fall below 3 days within a week, I'm not feeling good. But if I push myself to try to do 5 and I don't make it to 5, and I get disappointed in myself, and that doesn't help. So I think it's also important, as you work through any sort of like fitness journey or health journey, figuring out that balance of like what is actually achievable for you so that you're not in a constant state of disappointment in yourself. What's going to be a healthy impact on yourself without it being a mental detriment, but in fact being the opposite, something that actually lifts you up. And look, when you look at a week, like 3 days is actually less than half. Like, to some, it would seem like that's actually, not that great. My husband would tell you so, but guess what? That's what works for me. Like, 3 days a week is just what I need, along with like a healthy diet. So find that sweet spot. What's going to make you feel good and not make you feel bad about yourself if you don't achieve that goal.
I think that's great advice. So one of the things that you mentioned earlier that I thought was really important, and it kind of ties into what you just said about knowing yourself and your balance of being healthy, is, you mentioned a couple of times of the word, a calling, right? Your peers at Goodwill definitely had a calling for social work, and you knew that you had a calling for someplace in leadership. How would you advise people to dig in, learn? Are there maybe some books that you would suggest besides the Leader Lab, which we'll put in the chat here for everybody? I think some people already pinged that they bought it already after your suggestion. But what would you advise for somebody that maybe doesn't necessarily have that innate gut check that says, what's my calling? How would you advise going about finding that?
Yeah, I always think that taking some sort of personality test is really eye-opening. I've taken several throughout my career as part of like individual, curiosity, but also through team, building and things like that. It was really interesting. I think one of the first times I took this was actually with a sales team, and it was crazy how much we all aligned. And I was like, okay, there's something to this. Like, we all kind of fall in this one category, and there's several, but I would say, it's interesting you mentioned gut. Like, all the personality tests have always shown me that I'm a very like intuitive, emotionally led person. Like, husband can also verify this. I don't necessarily argue with facts and logic. I argue with emotion, and I trust my gut. But guess what? That means I really need to lean into a balance of logic. And I need to make sure that as a manager, or when I'm having conversations or working my way through life, I'm always balancing what I know I innately am. So I think, yeah, if you haven't ever taken a personality test, that was a pretty big eye opener to me. And I know there's so many resources and things out there that will say, like, this may be a career or a strength that you have that you can lean into. And that was really eye opening for me. I would also say, like, point two to that outside of a personality test is like network. Networking can be daunting. I'm actually talking about personality tests. It's interesting because I'm a weird introvert extrovert. I actually lean more introverted than extroverted. You think in sales that's bizarre, but I am not one to be a networker to any like sort of natural stretch like you are. I mean, like, talking to strangers terrifies me, and I prefer to have dinner with 5 people instead of go to like a crowded room of strangers. But you don't need to have this crazy amount of people in your LinkedIn network or work network to actually make meaningful connections. Like, I have probably a pretty small condensed network of people in the workplace that I check in on and see how they're doing, a combination of old managers and coworkers that have really risen through the ranks and are doing awesome things. It's not this vast network, but I would say, like, start somewhere. Ask questions. I did a lot of that. Like, I asked my managers a lot about what they liked and didn't like about their job to see if I wanted to get in management. So it's a little bit about learning about yourself, but also being comfortable talking to people about, the things that aren't so pretty about their job, and the things that they still get up and are motivated by in their job. And hopefully those things can help kind of cut through the noise of maybe what your gut might be telling you.
That's great advice too. So in sales in particular, there is always this place where you go in the climbing of the ladder, where you go from individual contributor to a sales manager. My personal experience was I was a great individual contributor, but I knew that, like, managing a P&L and, hey, did you do this? Did you do that? And where are we at with this deal? If that was my full time, would not fill my soul and my cup. I kind of morphed into sort of the demand gen content creation, fueling more augmented leads rather than being just that. And then I do my business development and snag some opportunities along the way. So I kind of have a popcorn approach to sales, even though I love it, breathe it, live it. I lead with it. But being a true sales manager, like what you do, no chance. Like, that would not fill my heart and soul. I could not do it. So salespeople, though, tell us a little bit about some of the different career trajectories there are. I just gave one example where some people go from individual contributor to then understanding, okay, if I had more qualified leads, that'd be awesome, right? And so I kind of morphed that way into an executive position on the lead gen side. So what are some of the other career paths that people can take? If they're not necessarily led, or made up of somebody that could lead a sales team. And is there anything wrong with being an individual contributor till the end of time? Tell us a little bit about the different options there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer your second question first, because I think I can say it most succinctly. Like, no, be an individual contributor all day. Like, I totally respect people that decide they want to pursue a lifelong career of sales, because I mean, and again, I'm biased. I have such respect for people who are, in that grind day in, day out. And the interesting thing about sales is, like, you can sell anything. I mean, there is, if you feel like, you know what, I'm an individual contributor, but I'm really interested in this industry, you have all the core skills to then pivot and say you want to now enter that industry. So I think nothing wrong with being an individual contributor. A lot of growth can always continue to happen in that space, just given the unlimited opportunities and endless things that are being sold. So yeah, I mean, I think that's great. My husband, like, he always says, I will never be a manager. I will be a salesperson until the end of time. I think that's great. I think in terms of other options, like, it's not just managerial and individual contributor. When you're in sales, I truly think there is such a natural kickoff point to a lot of different things, especially depending upon where you're at and what you're selling. So for instance, I work for a marketing agency. Like, I have been exposed to revenue operations and marketing is almost kind of just a different side of the coin of sales and looking at it through a different lens. There's business development too. So that kind of bridges the gap of lead gen and sales. And do you want to actually take the managerial route of being a biz dev manager instead of a sales manager? So there's stuff within an organization, not only that I feel like you could pivot to, but when you're thinking about going really outside of the box, like, consulting and being freelance is, like, huge. And I'm not enough of a risk taker to maybe make that leap maybe one day, but, like, I've pondered with the idea of, like, you can be your own entrepreneur and own boss and consult, and bring, like, the skill set that you've learned to other businesses or individuals. And I think it's one of the most natural places to also start your own business, because it's very entrepreneurial in spirit, and that you have to know how to pitch something to people and do it succinctly. So a lot of salespeople start their own companies. Again, I'm a little too risk averse to make the plunge right now, but I think there's lots of paths for any salesperson. It's just about kind of figuring out what's gonna, be for you and right at your point in time.
Yep, absolutely. So another question just popped in. How do we avoid being a bit too harsh while judging ourselves with respect to health and work? It never feels easy to give oneself the leeway that we would often give others.
Yeah, I totally feel that. I think there's also this Wonder Woman syndrome that women have, where we do feel like we have to be able to do it all and do it the best constantly. I wouldn't shy away from asking your peers or your direct reports what they think you're doing really well right now. Like, that's something that I've had to lean into, because I tend to be a little bit overly humble and not really need a pat on the back. And I've always prided myself in, like, not needing to get that, like, gold star for doing my job. Which again is so anti-sales in some way, which is probably why I knew I needed to be a manager, because you don't get a lot of gold stars as a manager, let me tell you. But one piece of advice, and I forget who gave it to me, was like, sometimes you need to ask about not what you should be doing better, but like, what are you doing well? And I think that was great advice. And I've kind of had to check myself and lean into that sometimes, because it's so easy to try to constantly improve and only focus on the negative. But I remember when I did that exercise, I got feedback about things that I was doing well that I wouldn't have even pinpointed that for myself as something that was like a strong suit. So don't feel uncomfortable or weird sometimes saying, hey, I want to just make sure I'm understanding what I've nailed. Like, can you share with me some of the things that I've got locked and loaded and that I'm doing well? And hopefully that gives you that boost and that self-esteem to know that it's not all bad.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And feedback is such a gift. I think sometimes it comes with a negative connotation. I'm going to get feedback, and especially with Yelp reviews in today's age, it's like giving feedback can be a scary thing, but it's such a gift to really get a 360-degree view of who you are and what you're perceived as, right? As well as the skills and what you're putting forth towards an organization. So I think that's great advice. Always ask where you can, and feedback from the people above you, ahead of you, and the ones behind you that you're mentoring to and new to the organization. I think that's really, really fantastic. And in kind of keeping that thread, what are some of the ways in which you motivate your team? You did mention again that you do have a global team, so you guys have to work remotely, and connect. And sometimes that's not always easy through these screens. While we can build rapport, it isn't always the easiest. So how is it that you motivate your team and make sure that that connectivity is still strong, working globally and remotely?
Yeah, I mean, this is an area where transparently I'm trying to get better at. Like I mentioned to you, like I'm not very much of one that naturally needs a pat on the back or like that motivation. I have this like natural drive. And so because of that, personally, that becomes a weak spot to remind myself that, oh, my team may not operate like me. Like they probably need a little bit more motivation. They may need a little bit more of a push. And look, being in sales, this answer and response is probably may not work for everyone, because at the end of the day, they all have a number they have to hit, and it's glaringly obvious like that there can be some competition there as a motivator. So I mean, that's in the sales position, some of the things that I can lean into, and my team like naturally loves. I see Jay on here. She's actually on my team. She's one of the ones that loves a good competition. So we do things like competing with one another and, sharing with each other things that work. But I think, the way I naturally motivate that I lean into is providing a really good culture for my team. Like there's something to be said about being motivated to like do better and push yourself. But there's something about just being motivated to like log in and show up that day and do your job, especially if you've had a hard day. And I think the way that I can provide that for my team is creating like a comfortable, open, safe environment that they feel valued and respected and like I care and I can hear them out. You mentioned that at the top of your meeting, you asked like, what healthy thing did you do? Well, at the top of our sales meeting, I have like, tell me something about like weird that happened in your week or something I didn't know. I can't remember how I phrased it, but I always want to start off the meeting with like us not talking about work. And this probably sounds so millennial to our parents, but it's like, let's just not get straight to business and let's share something quirky or interesting and get to know one another a little bit more. And outside of like the standard competitions and this and that, I think, and that's what's motivated me in jobs is to feel valued and feel like I'm working with people that care. And so I try to provide that environment for my direct reports.
That's awesome. Yeah, and in our monthly happy hour, they do like a little activity on mentee.com where we learn something new or somebody's favorite song or something, whatever, right, that we may not have known before. We have 9 minutes left, guys, so get your questions in. There's a couple more here that I'm going to break through. Let's see. So how did you break into a sales role as a woman and gain confidence and trust amongst your male counterparts? Great question.
Yeah, I think it's still a journey. I'm not gonna lie. I think as a woman, I still do feel a more natural camaraderie with some of the women I work with, and I try to break through that. I think it is still very prevalent. I still think, unfortunately, I've seen and experienced behaviors at conferences, and things like that, where you see kind of all the guys going to golf together or going to, happy hour or something, and it's like, I didn't get that invite. So it's a work in progress still, I think, for a lot of women in the workplace today. Um, I will say, though, I had to learn that the hard way, because I think what was kind of a blessing in disguise was I was a little naive to that when I first started out in sales. Like, again, kind of seeing my mom as this front runner in the workforce and executive, and she kind of like shielded us when we were younger, me personally, from like all the terrible things that she went through as a woman in the workplace that I'm just now actually learning about as I'm sharing things with her. And she's like, oh my gosh, I remember XYZ. Like, they wouldn't even address my assistant because she was a female, so I'm learning things now. But I think when I grew up, I had this false sense of like, men and women aren't different in the workplace. Like, there's no discrepancy there. And I think that carried me for so long, this like false sense of confidence, until I actually was faced with like, oh wait, no, this like still exists. And in some ways, even more negatively, because people think that it doesn't exist anymore, but there are little microaggressions and things that still take place. So I think it's a work in progress. I still say link arms with your women coworkers and your colleagues. That will still be super important. But I think advice I sometimes need to even take myself is pushing those male colleagues a little bit, like pushing yourself out of your comfort zone when you want to maybe stay quiet or don't feel as comfortable raising something because it's a male or it's a male superior. Like, I still feel like I have to push myself, because guess what? I'm probably going to make the difference or make them see something that they're not necessarily noticing. So work in progress for me too, still.
And I think the key there is just recognizing that, it's our responsibility to at least try. And it's by building forums like this and opening communication pathways with our employees, with our peers, with our colleagues, with our partners, to make sure that we're always trying to add parity where we can. But I'm not going to pretend to say that men and women are exactly equal either. That's not what the argument is here. It's just about having the same opportunities to excel. And I think something that you mentioned resonated earlier this week too, echoed in what somebody said. It's not just about getting a seat at the table, at the boardroom, at the meeting. It's about getting the invite to the golf game or the afterwards, or where some of the business really does transpire. And I think that's also an important thing to note, is that there's just as much business that happens outside of the meeting as it does in the meeting. And it's really bridging the gap there to make sure that there's inclusivity, with or without the timeline of a Zoom meeting or of a boardroom meeting. So I think that's so fantastic. So Luisa, with 5 minutes left, and I've learned so much more about you than I already did. My favorite human continues to impress me and amaze me. What is one little nugget that you'd leave everybody with? If you could impart one piece of wisdom that they take away from everything that you've learned so far in your path to leadership, what would that be?
That's a tough one. Well, as I glance at my notes, and something I didn't really touch on, and it seems cliche, but I think, we're really moving towards a time, all this discussion about mental health and fitness and everything, is we truly are blessed to be in a space in time where we're really working to live, not living to work. And I find, again, talking about Wonder Woman, and, that whole feeling that we have to be it all and do it all, I have to kind of pause and remind myself of that. So I think while we're all trying to do the next best thing and trying to continuously climb to the top of whatever that goal is, I think like sometimes it is really important to pause and take a step back and think about that work-life balance. And if we're in a place that is facilitating working to live and not living to work, because at the end of the day, there's so much more out there than just what we're showing up as in our careers and in our workplace.
I think that's so positive. Thank you so much. And, the only other thing that I'll say that of one of the sessions that I'll send you the recording for this week that I thought was so cool was somebody said, you're never done learning. And what you're learning to do is not only be the person that you show up as work, it's the same person that's going to be outside of work too. So the work that we do on ourselves, period, makes us better aunts, mothers, wives, sisters, all the different roles that women inherently carry. And the most poignant definition of being a Wonder Woman is knowing where your limits are and knowing when it's okay to say, nope, can't do that. Because I think we are a yes community in general, just because of historical boundaries that we've been put with. So I think that's a wonderful takeaway. Well, guys, the LinkedIn information for Luisa is in the chat. Thank you so much for tuning in. Some of you have been with us all week. We've had over 95 women show up this week in various pops in, pops out of different stories. This has really been an amazing week, and I'm so proud of my team for putting this together and for all the speakers who generously gave their time. Luisa, thanks again for showing up on a holiday. I thank you so much, and thanks to everybody who's here today. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.